Hey everyone, welcome to Recombinant Teaching. I'm your host, Justin Schaefer, and on this show, I'm holding STEM education office hours where I'll unpack your questions on STEM pedagogy, student success, academic careers, and everything in between. I've taught about 10,000 students in my 13-year career, and just like you, I've spent countless hours in the trenches working with students, helping them learn how to succeed in college and beyond. Through hosting this show, I hope that we can learn from each other, solve some problems, share some tips and advice, and ultimately improve STEM education together. If you have a question you'd like me to tackle, check out my website or the show notes and click the Submit a Question link. Whether you want to write in, send an audio clip, or join me live, I'd love to have you be a part of the show. Okay, today we got another guest that we're going to hear from. We have Taylor Darwin from Texas. So Taylor, if you want to introduce yourself.
Hi, Justin. Thanks for having me on. I am, like you said, Taylor Darwin. I am in Texas, and I am an assistant professor of mathematics at Tarleton State University. And I just entered that role recently this year after taking a little bit of a break from teaching, I guess you would say. I've got about a decade of teaching experience, and after I got my PhD, I did my postdoc at the University of Southern California, and then I worked at the Charles A. Dana Center at the University of Texas at Austin. And I worked a lot with systems and institutions and supporting institutions and their gateway level math courses and corequisites. Then I went on to Almy Education and did similar work there before. Now I just really miss students. I missed working with students, and now I'm back in the classroom, and I'm very excited to be here. And in my current role, I work with pre-service teachers as well as just students who are taking that math course that they have either been putting off for a while, or that math course that is giving them a lot of anxiety. And so really being able to be back in the classroom and think about how to support those students has been kind of an exciting thing to tackle in the last year or so.
Oh, that's super exciting. Yeah, and everyone listening, I can attest to Taylor's passion for teaching and helping students learn, as I've worked with her in some projects in the past. And yeah, I bet that was gnawing at you, honestly, not being in the classroom, because there's something special about that experience, as stressful as it can be, right? Working with our students. But if you're not in there, yeah, I mean, what was it that you missed the most about being not being in the classroom?
Yeah, no, that's a great question because I really enjoyed my role at the Dana Center and with Almy Education, and still some of the work that I do there and working with those people. But I must say, I just don't get the same amount of fulfillment that I do working with students and having, these conversations with students about what their lives going to look like after this class that I'm, with them, and how do we, get past this hurdle, and how do we think about skills that are going to be useful to you now and later on in life. And I will say I've been part of some really exciting initiatives and projects, and you and I have been working on some of those projects together. But yeah, there's just something about being with students that energizes me that nothing else quite gives me that level of energy and fulfillment. And I will say too, being part of the conversation and being and making decisions and with institutions and collaborating with institutions, it's really easy to remove yourself as part of the classroom piece. And I just think it's really crucial for people who are making these sort of decisions to have some level of interaction with students, whether it's adjuncting or,
Yep.
I don't know. So I kind of, all of those things to say, I'm very happy to be back in the classroom.
Yeah, oh, that's great. And we were talking before we started recording, yeah, about sometimes administrators at higher ed, they don't teach anymore. Oftentimes, most of the time they don't. And you kind of lose that connection of what it's like to be a teacher in the classroom. And then you're making decisions that impact curriculum or student learning or student contact. But you haven't done it in so long. Like it's really important to still be in there and be in those trenches and doing that work together. So yeah, I think it's the best of both worlds if you can do both things, but it's only so much time in the day.
And it's interesting that you say that too, because I mean, from the time that I started my postdoc and did a few different things until I returned to the classroom, because before I started my postdoc, I had been teaching in higher ed for a while. And then I took this little bit of time away from the classroom. And even for, let's say, the 4 years that I was removed from the classroom, students' needs and just the way that they are this generation, it's changed so much. And so to have a pulse on that, I think is so critical in all of the decision making that happens around faculty and institutions.
Yep. Couldn't agree more. All right. I'll stop asking you questions because I think you might have a question for me, right? So what do you got?
I do. Yeah. So, within my own work and even, some of the conversations that I have with other people at institutions and really trying to grapple with how do we increase pass rates? How do we get students interested in, I teach math. So how do we get students interested in math? It's always at the core of that is how do we engage students because they seem not engaged. And is that unique to this generation of students? Has it always been this way? And how do we know that a student is engaged? So really just around this idea of engagement.
I think that's an age-old question, I'm sure. I mean, when I was in college 20 plus years ago, I remember there were classes that I just could not care less about, but you had to be in there and you had to get through it. Did the faculty do a good job to try to get me engaged? I don't remember, honestly. It's been too long, but yeah, I mean, I think there's different levels of engagement. So is it engagement with the subject matter itself? Is there engagement with the topic and how that will relate to your own life moving forward? Or is it just the actually minute by minute engagement in the classroom, right? Of what actually happens during instruction. So is one of those areas more interesting to you now to talk about versus the others?
Let's keep it discipline agnostic just for the fact that, for example, in math, we have math pathways. And I would say like a catch-all for students in algebra, they are hopefully interested in the subject matter because they're going on to continue, in upper level math, sciences, and all that.
Yep.
Let's say this is for just any student who needs to check that box. I need to take stats. I need to take biology. I need to get this math or science credit, and then I'm on my way with the rest of my life.
Okay. So it's more about them caring about engaging with the content of the material, not necessarily how you're teaching it to engage them while they're sitting in the classroom.
Yeah, we can. Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. I mean, it can go both ways for sure, but I'm driving it that way because I'm thinking about values. Okay, so there's, and I'll put some links in the notes to this, but there's a lot of good work done on expectancy value theory, and this was pioneered by some work at UC Irvine for a long time now. But when I was there as a faculty member, a teaching faculty, I worked with a guy named Peter McPartland, who's now in industry, but he was a grad student and he did some work with me, and he focused on again, expectancy value theory work. And one of the values of these tenets, there's 4 of them. And again, I'll give a link. And I'm not an expert on this, so anyone listening who is, forgive me for doing my best here. But one of the values is utility value. Okay, and that is about basically how useful is this for you, for your career, for your life. All right, and the nice thing about utility value is there's been interventions developed that have been documented and published that this actually improves students' utility value, and that improves how much they care and how much they want to engage with the course material. So for an example, and I'll find the papers for this and put them in the notes, but one that I'm thinking of in biology is, let's say you're learning about, I don't know, cellular respiration and how cells work to make energy from the food that we eat. And students just don't see the point of that, even though it's powering your body and how you survive, right? But if you take some time to write a paragraph, just a couple sentences about how this could be useful to your career, how this could be useful to your life, what's the utility of learning about this, it's shown some really positive, dramatic gains, not only in that utility, but also in student engagement and student learning and performance. So that could be an interesting angle to think about for math, right? About how stats or how algebra is actually useful in what I'm doing. So kind of make that personal connection to the values. Yeah. And that could help get students engaged and want to be more engaged with the material.
Yeah, no, I like that. And this idea of relevance and we always kind of joke in math. Students are always like, when am I going to use this in
Yes.
my real life?
Yep.
And if you're unable to answer that as an instructor, I think that is an issue. Because you could also look at, what are you teaching the students? Like, is it useful? And if not, perhaps you should consider, do we really need to teach this? Can we teach it a
Yeah.
different way? And so I've grappled with, both curricularly and instructionally, how to engage students. And I will say too, the other question you asked was about the instructor and techniques that the instructor
Mm-hmm.
can use. And I thought too, when I was kind of thinking about this question, and the reason I ended up saying just any course is, I thought about a course that I took in college that I did not like the subject matter, and it was history. And I've never really been that excited about history. But this instructor, I just remember, I worked so hard in this class.
Yeah.
There's no students made A's. And I was like, I'm going to make an A because I want this instructor to be proud of me. I think he's awesome. He brings so much energy, and he's so excited about the subject matter, and it makes me excited about it. And I just always think of that example when I think about how to support my students, because of course we are all interested in our own subject matter, but
Mm-hmm.
how do we get other people interested and engaged in that?
Yep.
So I appreciate your response.
Yeah, and just building on that too, right? I love that you have that fond memory of that professor there, because it sounds like he really cared not only about history, but also about teaching history. And that matters, right? If you don't have the enthusiasm, if you don't have that spark of curiosity yourself that you want to pass on with your students, I think it's gonna be a hard time to teach. Doesn't mean
Yeah.
you have to do backflips and juggle and be a super extrovert at all, but you just have to convey, I think, in the classroom a level of excitement for the subject matter, and that can help your students get engaged too. While
Yeah.
again bringing in those real world connections, showing how this is going to be useful for their own lives. In some classes, that's easier than others, right? I teach anatomy and physiology. Super easy, right? We all have a body. We all have health, right? It's super easy to connect all of this to what's going on with your own personal self. Pre-calculus, a little bit maybe more challenging, right? Some kind of history course might be a little more challenging too. But yeah, having that enthusiasm as an instructor, that, twinkle in your eye, if you will. And again, like, you're not a history person, it sounds like, but you remember this guy really well because of all the good stuff he did. And then, we could get into a whole host of, actual things to do during the classroom to get students engaged every minute by minute, but maybe we could save that for another time, because I think that'd be a whole nother conversation. But yeah, it's just that, and again, and those E words, enthusiasm, excitement, I think they're important.
Yeah. And I think you've mentioned something that is really important too. And it sounds cheesy, but not only an enthusiasm for the content, but an enthusiasm and an excitement for the students.
Oh, yeah.
And again, it sounds cheesy, but if you show a student that you care about them, you care about their goals, you care about them as a human being, you learn parts of their life, I think that can go such a long way too. Because I had instructors and I could not care less about the subject matter, but I knew that they cared about me, and I knew that they wanted me to succeed.
Yeah.
And that was really important too.
Showing that you care, you don't have to be your best friend to your students, absolutely not, but just having a positive community, using your students' names, asking how they're doing, things like that, like, they go such a long way. And even the other day, I had a student talk to me after class, and I don't think he's ever raised his hand this entire semester. I think he talked to me after class early on in the semester once, and I loosely remembered his name. I was looking at some group files with him, and so I kind of had a little cheat sheet there to remember his name, but I called him by his name, and he's like, "How did you remember my name?" He's like, I've never asked a question, but that's amazing that you did that. I'm like, well, no, so I'm trying to downplay it, but I could tell, like, he was really touched, just the fact that I tried, even though I didn't, didn't remember it right away. But, so little things like that. I totally agree with you, Taylor. Just, that enthusiasm and excitement for the content and the teaching, but then for your students' well-being and everything too. That's all going to hopefully lead to better engagement that you asked about, and help them see those connections.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think lastly, we as a higher education need to combat the stigma that exists, that there's power dynamics. You cannot come and ask the professor. You cannot do this. the professor won't know your name are things that we need to combat, and we need to create, like you've mentioned, this positive community and a supportive community for students, and connecting them to one another, especially in this day and age where it seems like with technology we've become a little less connected.
Yeah, and that's a whole nother conversation to have too.
Now I'm opening a can of worms. I'll stop.
No, it's great. It's great. But yeah, I hope you all listening can tell, that Taylor really cares about this stuff too. And, I think all of us listening do too. So thanks for that question, Taylor, and thanks for being part of the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Justin.
All right, so that's it for this episode of Recombinant Teaching. If you want to be a part of the show, check the show notes for the link. Also, please check out my website if you'd like to learn how I can work with you, your department, or your institution to improve STEM education. Thanks for listening, and happy teaching.